In today's video, we bring you what can only be described as one of the luckiest men alive. Martin de Jonge, born in March 1985, was a professional cyclist from Holland, who rode for approximately a decade. In 2014, Martin had the luck of his life, not just on a bike but also by cheating death, not once but twice. Martin not only reached the first stage 4 at the Tour of Thailand cycling event, but he also avoided certain death on 2 occasions through good fortune. In the same year, Martin was due to be on board 2 Malaysian airline flights, but opted for other flights instead. The first of these 2 Malaysian airline flights Martin was due to be on was MH370. For anybody that hasn't heard what happened to this flight, it went missing under extremely dubious circumstances on 8th of March when it took off from Kuala Lumpur with a scheduled destination of Beijing. On this occasion, Martin took an earlier flight instead. 4 months later, on the 17th of July, Martin was due to be on Flight 17 from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur, which was shot down over Ukraine, killing every person on board. On this occasion, Martin opted for a cheaper flight. I'd like this guy's lottery numbers. Do you have any lucky stories? Let me know in the comments.
In 1984, a 19-year-old man described as very close to his family, emptied his bank accounts and drove 1,300 miles, only to be discovered frozen in an ice block and identified 10 years later. What's the story? Find out more in this video and please subscribe, thank you. Tim Molnar, a 19-year-old student in 1984 from Daytona Beach, Florida, who was reported to have been an extremely family-oriented man and a happy man who disappeared. Instead of taking his usual route to school, Tim dropped his younger brother off at school, then drove 50 miles in the mirror opposite direction, stopped to fill up his car with gas, and carried on cruising. He never made it to school himself, and nobody heard from him until 4 months later, when his car was discovered at a Greyhound bus station in Atlanta, Georgia, some 430 miles away. An auto impound company in Atlanta had contacted Tim's parents to let them know that Tim's car had been left in a parking lot 6 days after he had vanished. Tim's parents then learned that their son emptied almost all of his bank account on the morning he disappeared. Despite not having taken any clothes with him, it was like Tim had taken off to adopt a new life. Soon after, a man named Stephen Cull found a body frozen in an ice block in Neosho, Wisconsin. The body was unable to be identified for over a decade, until the case was brought back to life in 1996 when it was featured in a TV show. Stephen Cull, who had found the unidentified body in an ice block 10 years earlier, recognized the clothes on the TV show and alerted the authorities. Using the DNA from the body, forensics linked it as a perfect match to Tim Molnar, although his cause of death could not be determined. Whilst this may have brought Tim's family some closure, it did not answer the question, why did a 19-year-old college student that was very close to his family empty his bank account, get in his car, and end up over 840 miles away frozen in an ice block? Police had no suspects, and although Tim's uncle's name cropped up a few times for being particularly creepy, he was never convicted for this crime. Rumors circulated that Tim may have been using drugs, however this were never proven. So is foul play on the agenda? Did Tim owe a drug dealer money? Or does this mysterious case suggest something even more horrifying? Let me know what you think in the comments.
A man from Arizona, grieving for his mother who had recently died, donated her body to science for research purposes as she had wished for, only to discover that she would be sold, strapped to a chair, and blown up by the military. Even I couldn't make this up. Let's find out more about how and why this happened, and please subscribe, thank you. Doris Stauffer was a loving grandmother, and for the last year of her life, she had been suffering from Alzheimer's disease, although doctors argued that she did not possess the gene for it. Doris spent her last years in a hospice, and was visited regularly by her son Jim. In 2013, at the age of either 73 or 74, Doris sadly passed away, and during this difficult period, doctors approached Jim with a request of donating his mother's body, particularly her brain, to science, in order to study it, in a bid to help understand and cure others from the disease in the future. If Jim agreed to this, his mother's body would have certain parts taken for research, and the remainder would be cremated, with the ashes being sent to Jim's house. Jim knew that his mother would have wanted to help others, as she was a caring lady, and so after much deliberation, Jim agreed. Doris's body was kindly donated to the Biological Resource Center in Maricopa County, Arizona that was founded in 2004, after Jim had spoken with them to find out what the neurologists do, and seemed to trust them, just like dozens of other families who had opted for the same thing. Jim completed the relevant paperwork, specifically ticking a box that prohibited military, traffic safety, and other non-medical experiments. As sad as Jim was, a service was held for Doris, and true to their word, Jim received some of his mother's ashes in the post from the Biological Resource Center 10 days later, but with no explanation as to how his mother's body was being used. That should be where this story ends, but unfortunately, there is more than one hell of a creepy development. Reports surfaced of the Biological Resource Center in Arizona selling and harvesting organs. Instead of researching body parts for the greater good, they were in fact human body brokers. Doris Stoffer's hand had been detached from her body and cremated, and were the ashes Jim received at his home. Her brain was never used for Alzheimer's research. In fact, her body was sold for $5,893 to the military, who had plans to use it for reasons that made me physically sick. Doris's body was one of 20 or so dead bodies that was used in blast experiments arranged by the Pentagon, without any permission from the donors or their relatives, in a serious violation of U.S. Army policy. It is alleged that the military were using the dead bodies of humans to test IEDs and bombs as mannequins were not fit for purpose. It is reported that Doris was strapped to a chair, and had an explosive device detonated under her chair. Her body was in pieces, and the hand was all that was left to cremate and send back to her son. As disgusting as this is, the Army aren't completely at fault here, as the paperwork from the Biological Resource Center is alleged to have been tampered with, in order to profit from the deceased. It would turn out they had sold over 20,000 parts from 5,000 human bodies over a period of a decade. The former owner Stephen Gore pleaded guilty of fraud in 2015 and was sentenced to his undisclosed term, probably a small fraction of what it should have been. Documents revealed that body parts were being sold for specific prices: $5,893 for a whole body, spines at $1,900, legs at $1,300 each, and torsos at $3,500. When the FBI raided the center in 2014, they discovered severed heads tossed into trash bags, pools of blood, and a fridge full of penises. Even more disturbing, the FBI found a torso with a different head sewn on, like some kind of Frankenstein. After watching this, would you ever consider donating a departed loved one to science, only for their bodies to be blown up with enormous explosives, or simply have a solemn burial or cremation service? Let me know in the comments. I'm off for a lay down. In 1982, in the windy city of Chicago, at least 7 people were poisoned when they purchased medication from an authorized pharmacy. The deceased thought they were taking a treatment for pains and fevers, but unfortunately, they had ingested cyanide. How and why? Find out more in this video, and please subscribe, thank you. In the Chicago metropolitan area in 1982, a series of poisoning deaths resulting from drug tampering killed at least 7 people. These poor souls had mistakenly taken potassium cyanide instead of the Tylenol branded acetaminophen capsules they believed they had purchased. One of these deaths included a child. In chronological order, 12-year-old Mary Kellerman was hospitalized on the 28th of September, 1982 after taking an extra-strength Tylenol capsule, and died the next day. On the 29th of September, 1982, 6 further individuals that had taken contaminated Tylenol also died. They were Adam Janis aged 27, Stanley Janis 25, Teresa Janis 20, Mary McFarland 31, Paula Prince 35, and Mary Reiner 27. A public health official visited the Janis household to investigate how 3 members of one family had died. Nurse Helen Jensen located a Tylenol bottle and the receipt of purchase, then noticed that 6 pills were missing, and that there was an almond scent coming from the bottle. She reported her findings, and the county's chief toxicologist who examined the bottle more closely. It was determined that over a tenth of the remaining capsules inside the Janis bottle had 3 times the fatal amount of cyanide required to kill, which prompted an emergency broadcast to notify the general public not to take Tylenol in the near future. Almost immediately after this broadcast, Tylenol was removed from shelves, and in fear of possible copycats, some other medicinal products were also pulled from stores. With a stroke of luck, it was determined that the 7 deaths were tampered capsules from the same batch, leading Johnson & Johnson to issue a product recall for all Tylenol. This would cost them over $100 million in 1982, which is the equivalent of roughly $315 million in 2024. The only good that came out of this case was improvements to packaging were made, such as pull-off stickers, plastic wrap around the caps, and other safety measures that ensured they haven't been tampered with like the Tylenol bottles were. So who did this and why, are the obvious questions? A police investigation rapidly took heed, and the capsules were believed to have been manufactured in both Pennsylvania and Texas, some 1,600 miles difference. Nevertheless, was concluded that the drugs were tampered with after they had reached stores' shelves. In essence, the police believed that someone with ill intent had removed bottles from shelves, and placed potassium cyanide into some of the capsules, then carefully repositioned the bottles back onto the shelves, in wait of unsuspecting customers. A suspect named James William Lewis was accused of this awful crime, having sent a letter to Johnson & Johnson demanding a ransom of $1 million, in order to stop the poisonings. It was learned that James had previously owned a book relating to poisoning, and detailed in a confidential law enforcement document. James's fingerprints were lifted on the pages concerning cyanide. James vigorously denied being responsible for the poisonings, however admitted to blackmailing Johnson & Johnson, which he claims he had worked on for the best part of a week. He was convicted of extortion and sent straight to prison for a term of 10 years. Official court documents released in 2009 revealed the Department of Justice investigation notes and finalized that Lewis was responsible for the poisonings, despite the lack of evidence and motive. In 2010, James and his wife were required to offer DNA samples and fingerprints, in a bid to gain enough evidence that he had committed the crimes, and close the case, but a spanner was thrown into the works when the results did not match James to the bottles. James maintained his story that he was not guilty, right up until the 9th of July, 2023, when he passed away, aged 76. It would appear that James was innocent of the bottle tampering, and indeed only guilty of bribery, leaving no suspects. The police had also investigated a second man named Roger Arnold, who was a dock worker whose behavior had become erratic, and had confessed to being in possession of potassium cyanide. Roger's wife had recently left him, and he had also been heard discussing killing people with a white powder. This link grew stronger as Roger had worked with one of the victims, Mary Reiner's father. In addition, a book containing a recipe on making potassium cyanide was found in Roger's property. With evidence mounting against Roger, he was detained and questioned several times by the police, but they never had enough evidence to formally charge him. In a further twist, in the summer of 1983, Roger shot a man in a bar, and was convicted for the murder in January 1984, then served 15 years of a 30-year sentence. Roger died in June 2008, and in 2010, his body was exhumed, in order to take a DNA sample from his femur bone, in another bid to nail Roger for the crime. Roger's DNA did not match the DNA samples discovered on the bottles, and the police still did not have their killer. Copycat attacks involving Tylenol took place around the United States immediately following the Chicago deaths, and 3 more deaths were reported in 1986 from gelatin capsules. A 23-year-old named Diane Ellsroth died after ingesting extra-strength Tylenol capsules laced with cyanide, and Excedrin capsules in Washington were interfered with, which resulted in the deaths of Susan Snow and Bruce Nichol from cyanide poisoning. However, an eventual arrest and conviction of Bruce Nichol's wife, Stella Nichol, for her deliberate actions in the crimes connected to both murders. At least that was one more sicko off the streets. Other copycat deaths were attributed to tampered Sudafed and Anacin. No suspect has ever been charged or convicted of the poisonings, only for the bribery against Johnson & Johnson. So will this mystery ever be solved, and motive be obtained, or was this just one evil prank that the killer will take to the grave? Let me know what you think in the comments. In 2018, a simple baggage handler managed to steal a passenger plane, take off in it, and performed multiple stunts such as backflips and barrel rolls for an hour over the skies of America to perfection. But what happened to him? Find out in this video, and please subscribe, thank you. Richard Russell, nicknamed Beebo, was a goofy baggage handler or ground service agent at the Seattle-Tacoma Airport. He was raised by a military family in Alaska and had a loving wife, Hannah, who was his childhood sweetheart from school. He was described as a very kind man. Beebo's responsibilities around the airport were pretty basic, but after a few years, he was offered a lot more responsibility by starting up planes and towing them to the direction of travel to help save pilots time. This was a big deal to allow somebody other than flight crew into the cockpit of a plane, especially alone. Beebo was fascinated with the aircrafts, and was only allowed to touch certain parts that were pivotal to his role of towing, despite his temptation. Beebo had been caught playing with other controls before, and was warned by a pilot, who reported the incident. Nevertheless, no harm was done, and Beebo got to keep his job, albeit a little embarrassed by the event. On the 10th of August, 2018, and shortly before 7 p.m., 29-year-old Beebo was asked to tow a Bombardier Q400, owned by Horizon Air for Alaska Airlines, from the far north end of the airport's cargo hold. Beebo entered the cockpit to start the propellers, but instead of returning to his vehicle to tow the aircraft, he took a seat. Beebo had always wanted to fly a plane, and played hundreds of computer games doing exactly this kind of thing, but had no official piloting experience. This is when Beebo started to lose his mind, as this was an ideal opportunity to fly a plane, and the adrenaline kicked in. With nobody else in the cockpit, Beebo couldn't resist any longer, and rolled the plane forward. He was stealing a plane. The 13-foot propellers were no longer idle, and the plane taxied towards the runway. Air traffic control spotted the unauthorized attempt at takeoff and began frantically trying to make contact with Beebo, but he either didn't hear them or was ignoring them. It was too late. At 7:32 p.m., the Q400 roared down the runway, and unbelievably made a successful takeoff. Flights in and out of SeaTac Airport were immediately suspended. The Seattle Tower continued to try and make contact with Beebo, who eventually responded with odd sayings, such as "broken guy. Got a few screws loose, I guess." His actions had caused two McDonnell Douglas F-15 Eagle fighters to be scrambled to intercept Beebo and the plane, and he had now set in motion a criminal plot he couldn't come back from. Russell told the air traffic controller that his objective was to start the Q400 and get it into the air for a couple of hours. However, he confessed to a worrying lack of plan from there on, even commenting that he wasn't really planning on landing it. Beebo performed all sorts of crazy and dangerous maneuvers, such as looping the plane, and at such a low altitude, allowing many people to capture the wild sightings on video. These abrasive maneuvers caused Beebo to be sick and become lightheaded. NORAD was tracking Beebo's flight, and concluded that he was suicidal when fear was detected in his voice, and asked for advice on what he should do. By 8 p.m., Beebo had been in the air for almost 30 minutes, and seen a lot of Seattle and its neighboring islands, and reality had set in, that this plane was not going to land safely in the conventional way, despite being given as much assistance and options for places to land as possible, and the fuel would not last forever. NORAD eventually scrambled their jets out of Portland International Airport, following the FAA's advice that the pilot was a danger and a threat. The fully armed jets caught up to Beebo almost 45 minutes after he had been in the air at 8:15 p.m., but were still hesitant to action following the rules of engagement, which caused chaos during 9/11. Air traffic control kept trying to convince Beebo to land, and with jets on his tail, he even said, "Hey, you think if I land this successfully Alaska will give me a job as a pilot?" It appeared that Beebo had no chance of landing, and 17 incoming flights had already been diverted to nearby airports, and caused 75 delays, and 5 cancellations. With the situation not being terrorism, the F-15s trailed at a close distance, pondering on how to bring this matter to a safe end. Beebo careered over the Olympic Mountains, and the urgency heightened when he announced over the radio, "I got a lot of people that care about me, and it's going to disappoint them to hear that I did this. I would like to apologize to each and every one of them. I'm just a broken guy. Got a few screws loose, I guess. Never really knew it till now." The F-15s were then authorized to headbutt the Q400, and even to drop warning flares to enlist Beebo's compliance. But Beebo continued looping and flipping the plane like a possessed stuntman. Beebo had been in the air for over an hour now, and worryingly announced, "Think I'm gonna try to do a barrel roll, and if that goes good, then I'll just nose down and call it a night." At the time of this message, the plane was over water, but the 108-foot-long plane increased altitude, performed some more dives and upside-down swoops that could have easily stalled this kind of plane at 10 feet above the water. It was amazing in a creepy way that a man with no official piloting experience was flying a passenger airliner in a crazy fashion to perfection, thanks to instructional videos he had watched online. Suddenly, the fun had come to an end, and dangerously low on fuel, Beebo intentionally nosedived the plane into the woodland at the southern end of tiny Ketron Island. The impact of the trees caused the wings to fly off, and sparked a 2-acre fire. The FBI's official report confirmed that Beebo died of multiple traumatic injuries. After 1 hour and 15 minutes in the air, Beebo's crash landing was confirmed at 8:46 p.m. and died by suicide. The full extent of the reasons why Beebo did this have not been determined, but was not considered terrorism, and more along the lines of him being depressed or mentally unwell. It is claimed that Beebo decided to end it all the way he wanted to, which meant stealing a plane, inconveniencing many people, taking up hours of people's lives, putting others in danger, and causing over $30 million worth of damage for the plane, and taxpayers' money for everything else. The actions of one person's lunacy often becomes everybody else's problem, but sadly for Beebo, his final flight was still met with pain and upset. Beebo's grieving family stated that he was a faithful husband, a loving man, and a good friend, with the incident that led to his death being a complete shock. Both friends and family of Beebo believe he may have suffered a brain injury during his time at high school when he played football, and a teammate suggested Beebo's mental instability had been caused by an undiagnosed chronic traumatic encephalopathy that may have come from repeated concussions. In April 2022, the FBI released 500 pages of heavily redacted classified documents related to the investigation, but will we ever find out the truth? What do you think? Here are 4 of the most unbelievable true survival stories that will send your mind into overdrive. Let's do this. Number 4. On Christmas Eve 1971, 17-year-old Julianne Coep stepped on board Flight 508, which was heading from Lima to the eastern city of Pucallpa in Peru to visit her father. Julianne, her mother, and 86 fellow passengers took off successfully, and sat back in her seat 19F to enjoy the flight. Almost half an hour into the journey, Flight 508 entered a violent thunderstorm, and the plane began shaking. Julianne witnessed a bolt of lightning or a beam of energy strike the wing on the side of the plane she was looking out to. A lightning bolt had struck the motor. Within seconds, the plane started to rip apart, and Julianne, still strapped into her seat, was torn out of the plane at an altitude of more than 10,000 feet. Scared she was going to die, and struggling to breathe, Julianne plummeted to the ground, where she landed still strapped into her seat, but unconscious, in the Amazon jungle. Julianne laid motionless on the jungle floor for a day with a broken collarbone, twisted knee, and a few cuts. Eventually, she woke up alone in the rainforest, located a bag of candy that had also fallen from the plane, and managed to hike for 11 days. Julianne was found by 2 Peruvian loggers in a hut she had been camping out in, and they took her to a hospital in a nearby town. Julianne was reunited with the father, and although her mother survived the fall, she later died of her injuries. Julianne was the sole survivor of the crash, and went on to become a renowned zoologist. As of 2024, Julianne is still alive and well aged 69. I suspect she travels by boat now. Number 3. Phineas Gage, born in 1823, was undertaking work on a new rail track in Vermont at the age of 24 in 1848, and his role involved blowing up rocks. On this occasion, he placed a charge into a large rock, and began to pack sand around it using a stamping iron. The iron struck a small piece of metal in the sand, which created a spark, which tripped the charge, and resulted in an enormous explosion. Phineas was standing over the blast, and the 13-pound metal pole was violently blown upwards, and penetrated straight through his skull behind the left eye, entered his brain, and exited his skull the other side. He landed more than 80 feet away, but was still alive. His colleagues rushed over, and rushed him to a nearby doctor. This is one of the most gruesome injuries I have ever seen, and despite the loss of sight in one eye, I am amazed he survived. Whilst it is reported that Phineas' attitude changed following the incident, he went on to live for another 12 years, until he passed away aged 36 in 1860. Should have gone to Specsavers. Number 2. You may have seen the film, and if so, may be aware that this story is true. In 2003, American mountaineer Aaron Lee Ralston, born in 1975, fell into the Blue John Canyon in Utah, and landed with his right arm pinned behind an 800-pound rock. Being alone, and with the rock far too heavy to move, Aaron became stranded. He screamed for help, but nobody was around to answer his distress call. Aaron rationed his food and water in case help did not arrive, whilst he pondered over what to do. Days passed, and still nobody had come to rescue him, leaving Aaron to drink his own urine to avoid dehydration, and take emergency action to survive this ordeal. After 127 hours in the canyon, and nothing left to lose, Aaron pulled out a dusty blade from his multi-tool kit, and began making his way through his own hand. The pain was absolutely unbearable. Through torturous grit and determination, Aaron had detached his hand from his body, and gradually broke free of the giant rock. He made a sling to rest his arm in, and staggered out of the canyon, where he would later be discovered by hikers. If it wasn't for his bravery, Aaron may never have made it out of the canyon alive, which has allowed him to continue making solo travel expeditions. As of 2024, Aaron is still alive and well, aged 48. And finally, this one will blow your mind. In 2017, 25-year-old Michael Cassidy was involved in an extremely serious motorcycle incident when he lost control, hit a fire hydrant, and crashed, but somehow survived. His body flew through the air and landed on the fire hydrant, leading to him becoming face down, with his legs faced up. The hydrant had split his pelvis in two, or more commonly known as an open book fracture. He was bleeding to death. People rushed over to comfort Michael and a helicopter was deployed to get him to a trauma center. Doctors then inserted a special balloon catheter inside Michael's femoral artery and skirted it up near his aorta. The balloon was then inflated to block blood flow to Michael's lower half, in a bid to reduce further blood loss, giving the medical team an opportunity to view the damaged pelvis. Michael had a ruptured bladder, disconnected blood vessels, and his pelvis was broken like an unstarted jigsaw puzzle. Following a rather intense month of physical therapy, Michael was able to walk with a limp, and could pass waste through a colostomy bag. Michael's wife had also just given birth to their first child, so there was everything to celebrate. Without the quick-thinking doctors using a balloon catheter to slow the blood loss, and endless transfusions, it is unlikely Michael would have survived. Do you know of, or have any amazing survival stories? In 1987 in Georgia, a woman in her 70s got into the bath, whilst her unwell husband was asleep in another room. When she got out the bath and exited the bathroom, she was horrified to discover all the floors and walls were covered in blood, but not her husband's blood. So what happened and why? Let's take a closer look, and please subscribe, thank you. On the 8th of September, 1987, Minnie Clyde Winston, aged 77, was in her home of 22 years at 1114 Fountain Drive, Georgia, with her husband William Winston, aged 79. William had suffered from a chronic illness, and had to be wired up to a dialysis machine every day to filter his blood, leaving him tired a lot of the time. As William slept in his chair in the bedroom that evening, Minnie decided to take a bath, and unwind from the day. A little before midnight, Minnie got out of the bath, reached for her towel, and witnessed a horrendous sight. The bathroom floor was covered in what she thought was human blood, and it was everywhere like some sort of blood sprinkler had been set off in the room. As Minnie left the bathroom in horror to see if her husband was okay, she was greeted by blood in every other room too, seeping through the carpets, slithering down all of the walls. It was an absolute bloodbath. Minnie woke her husband fearing the worst, but to her amazement turned shock, William had not been bleeding and was okay. The bemused couple checked all 6 rooms of their property, and found no bodies, no pets, no nothing. It was like the house itself was bleeding, but assumed that a wounded animal had gained entry to their abode, or even an intruder attempting to escape someone. It did strike me as odd that the Winstons did not call the police there and then, but I guess they were tired and confused and it was late, although personally I'd have ran out of the house screaming like a baby. The Winstons decided to sleep on it, and contact the police in the morning, in the hope the nightmare would go away. The next morning, the police were called, and they arrived at what they thought was a gruesome crime scene. There was blood everywhere, on every wall and carpet of every room. The police concluded that the couple were not guilty of any wrongdoing. Nevertheless, were asked to vacate the property in order for the police to investigate the potential crime scene. As the neighbors' curtains started to twitch, blood samples were collected and taken to the Georgia Crime Lab. The blood was determined to be human and type O, and both the Winstons had blood type A. This incident truly baffled the police, and soon the media fell out of the sky for their scoop, such as the Palm Beach Post and the Atlanta Journal. 1114 Fountain Road, Georgia soon appeared on television sets and radio dubbed as the House of Blood. Some speculated that the Winstons in their 70s had murdered somebody, whilst others concluded it was the work of poltergeist activity. One theory even suggested that blood was intentionally smeared all over the walls for a sick hoax, as the Winstons' daughter worked in a hospital and would therefore have had access to blood. Bit of a leap. With no motive, evidence, or suspects, the police closed the case to avoid embarrassment. So what else do we know, and have there been any developments since? An independent investigator, Rebecca Long, claims to have had a replica incident since working on the case. She claims that one day she found hundreds of droplets of blood dripping down her bedroom wall, which has not been verified or documented. Kurt Rowlett and a cult waited 6 months before investigating the house to seek an all-round perspective of the incident. He contacted the Homicide Division, who denied him access to information or the home as the case was unsolvable and subsequently closed. This did not deter him, and so he contacted the Wintons directly. Kurt described Mrs. Winston as pleasant and forthcoming, and felt a tension in her that did not want to discuss the matter in detail. Mrs. Winston's story had evolved, as she told Kurt that the alleged blood on the walls was rust and mud mixed with water, projected into the rooms by a ruptured water heater in the basement. Despite the new explanation not being remotely plausible for a number of reasons, most notably that the police had confirmed the liquid was human blood. Mr. Rowlett swiftly detected some kind of a cover-up, and left Mrs. Winston to her day. In 2016, Reddit ran a post on this story. Some of the comments were bizarre, others intriguing, and a handful added some value. One comment stated, "There's a rare blood type called Bombay that makes type O blood look like type A blood when it's typed. This could very well be a case of that. It's a genetic mutation, which was discounted by others." Another interesting comment read, "I've heard cases of bleeding houses caused by leaking water passing over rusted nails and drawing the reddish pigment out with it, however would not explain every wall and carpet in every room being affected since the time Mrs. Winston was in her bath." The case has never been officially solved, and opinions continue to rear their ugly heads, which only seems to raise more questions. Why did Mrs. Winston change her story for Mr. Rowlett? Why have no missing persons cases been associated with the blood type found, or even a body for that matter? What do you think? A man was murdered in the safety of his own hotel room in the middle of one of America's most aged and most talked about hotels. The circumstances of this event are truly mind-blowing. Let's dig deeper into what happened, and please kindly subscribe. Thank you. So, on January the 5th, 1935 in Kansas City, Missouri, a man named Roland T. Owen checked into the hotel president. Less than 10 years earlier, the hotel president had hosted the Republican National Convention, nominating Herbert Hoover for president, and Frank Sinatra had even performed there. Mr. Owen appeared a quiet man, entering the hotel seeking an interior room on the upper floors. The room he was allocated was number 1046. Owen claimed to be from LA, and appearance-wise, was described to have had a memorable scar on his head and a cauliflower ear. He made conversation with the bellhop Randolph Prost, who couldn't help but notice that Owen did not have any luggage, barring a toothpaste and a comb in his pocket, and quizzed staff at the hotel for the 2 days he was there about random items. A maid named Mary Soptic had occasionally entered the room to perform her daily duties, and found it peculiar that the blinds were always closed during the day, and observed Owen sitting in the dark with a dim lamp on. She also said that Owen always looked troubled. Mr. Owen told Mary to leave the door unlocked once she had finished tidying up, as he was waiting for someone. On this occasion, on night 2 of Owen's stay, maid Mary claims that when she returned to room 1046 later that evening, Mr. Owen was fully dressed on the bed, and had left a note on the bedside table addressed to somebody named Dawn. The note read, "Dawn, I will be back in 15 minutes, wait." But nobody was ever seen entering or leaving the room. Maid Mary Soptic also reported other unusual events, such as Owen's room was locked from the outside on one occasion, however the door could only be locked from the inside, piquing her interest. Upon this visit, Mary had the telephone ring, and Owen answered and said, "No, Dawn, I don't want to eat. I am not hungry. I just had breakfast. No, I am not hungry." Also on the second day, Mary alleged she heard 2 men talking inside room 1046, however when she knocked to change the towels, she heard a deep voice that did not sound like Owen. A guest in the adjacent room also heard talking coming from room 1046, including shouting and cursing. The following morning, receptionist Della Ferguson began her shift as the switchboard and planned to offer Mr. Owen a wake-up call, when she noticed that his phone was off the hook, and alerted bellhop Prost, who discovered the door or room 1046 locked with a "Do Not Disturb" sign displayed. A second bellboy by the name of Harold Pike used a key to let himself in. He was disturbed to find Owen naked and unresponsive in the dark, so simply placed the phone back on the hook before leaving. A couple of hours later, the phone was back off the hook when the bellboy re-entered the room. He was in for a much bigger shock. This time Owen was on the floor, on his hands and knees, and his head was covered in blood. In addition, there was blood on the bed, in the bathroom, and smeared down the walls. The bellboy ran down to reception, and when he returned with a colleague, the door was blocked as Owen was slumped in front of it. The staff of the president attempted to communicate with injured Owen, but being severely dizzy, doctors were called to examine him. What they found was terrifying. Owen had previously been tied up with the telephone cord around his neck, wrists, and ankles. His neck displayed signs of strangulation, and he had been stabbed in the chest more than once. He also had an awful skull fracture from being struck in the head with an implement. Owen, still barely conscious, insisted that he had fallen on the bathroom floor, and when questioned as to who had hurt him, he replied, "Nobody," before being rushed to hospital. By the time Mr. Owen arrived at Kansas City General Hospital, he had already entered a coma and subsequently died quickly after. Nobody had seen anyone enter the room that morning. What on devil's earth had happened in room 1046, to leave staff wondering if they had just starred in a secret episode of The X-Files? I'd like to hear Mulder's views on this, and how did Owen get savagely murdered in locked room 1046? Owen's autopsy revealed that he had been aggressively bludgeoned and stabbed, some considerable time before he was found, meaning Owen had already been close to his coma when Bellboy Pike had entered his room earlier, but essentially died from his wounds. A search of the room did not reveal any weapons, but oddly, the soap, shampoo, and towels provided by the hotel to every room were missing, but a full bottle of diluted sulfuric acid was found. The fingerprints of an unknown woman were also found on the telephone in room 1046. With no evidence or witnesses, the unfathomable demise of Roland T. Owen was soon forgotten, despite a harrowing phone call from somebody by the name of Louise who had offered to pay for Owen's grave and service at a local cemetery. Months passed by without any new evidence presenting itself, then little after a year on from the mysterious death occurring, a new clue arrived. A friend of Owen's named Ruby Ogletree of Alabama identified him in the newspaper due to the scar on his temple, and the truth gradually came out. Police were informed that during his childhood, he was involved in an accident with hot grease that left the large scar on his head. Ruby identified the man assumed to be Roland T. Owen as her son, real name Artemis Ogletree, born in 1915. Ruby alleged that her son had taken off for California and had not returned. The case was reopened and soon they had a prime suspect by the name of Joseph Martin, who in turn was arrested in New York after killing his roommate and trying to transport the body to Memphis, although no charges were ever made. The question remains: who killed Artemis Ogletree in his locked room at the hotel President? Is Joseph Martin the suspect police were looking for? And what, if any, is the connection to Dawn? With the absence of suspects, there have been a number of theories, including Ogletree was killed in retaliation for his broken engagement. Lucky girl. It is also believed that the name Dawn was with reference to a mafia boss, and may have been involved with a criminal activity gone wrong. The hotel President remains open for guests to this day, but I'd give room 1046 a wide berth if I were you. The shocking circumstances surrounding the death of Artemis Ogletree remains unsolved, so if you have an opinion on what happened, please share it in the comments.
In 2007, a woman participated in a live radio competition to win a gaming console and was found dead just hours later as a result of it. KDND was a licensed radio station established in 1947 that broadcast on the frequency 107.9 in the Sacramento, California area. The station predominantly played music such as classic hits and soft rock, and often ran competitions. In January 2007, KDND held an on-air competition one morning, which quickly made the news. The competition was to win the extremely popular gaming console that everybody wanted to lay their hands on at the time, but could not get one for love nor money due to its popularity, and was of course the Nintendo Wii. KDND were in possession of one of those said consoles and kicked off the morning rave show called Hold Your Wii For A Wii, a classic title. The objective of this competition was to invite various people into the studio and challenge them to drink as much water as they could without urinating, and the last person to go to the bathroom would win the Wii. Loving mother of three, 28-year-old Jennifer Strange was desperate to get her hands on the console for her children, as she hadn't been able to acquire one thus far, and entered the KDND competition accordingly. She signed a waiver and took her place for the start of the contest. Jennifer and the other 16 or so contestants started the competition at 6:45 a.m. and had to drink an 8-ounce bottle of water every 15 minutes in the studio without using the bathroom. Couldn't be simpler, right? Everybody was so desperate to own the Nintendo Wii that they began overriding the pain. A few of the contestants eventually dropped out, but Jennifer kept plowing through, thinking about her children and what it would mean to them. This went on for some time, a bottle of water every 15 minutes, to a point that with only a few remaining in the contest, the bottle size had to be increased to speed the competition up. A nurse called into the show and advised the host that this competition could be dangerous, but the comment was shrugged off. Witnesses and the DJ even commented on Jennifer's stomach expanding so much that she looked pregnant. Eventually, enough was enough for Jennifer, and she was crowned the silver medal position. While she had lost out on the Wii, she did win tickets to a Justin Timberlake concert. At this point, Jennifer had drank roughly 2 gallons of water and was experiencing physical discomfort. On her way home, Jennifer called a friend to say that she didn't feel right, and her friend became concerned and even called her mother. Jennifer claimed she would be okay. Nevertheless, just hours after the radio competition had ended, Jennifer's mother paid her a visit, only to discover her on the floor having died of water intoxication. The FCC investigated the incident, and KDND owner Entercom Communications would be sued by Jennifer's family for wrongful death. Despite the signed waivers from contestants before the show, there was some serious liability exposure to be answered to, including coercion, but a lack of evidence of criminal misconduct would be the response. In 2009, the judge finally awarded Jennifer's children a sum of just over $16.5 million in damages. One selfless good deed to help out her children cost Jennifer her life and her children to grow up without their mother. R.I.P. Jennifer.
In 2009, 28-year-old Russian man Artyom Sidorkin suddenly became overwhelmed by severe chest pain, and it was so bad that it resulted in him coughing up blood. Alarmed by this, Artyom feared he may have cancer or a tumor, and went to the hospital where he was examined by surgeon Vladimir Kamashev. The surgeon, armed with Artyom's X-ray result, was convinced that he had a tumor, and suggested that the best option would be surgery, in order to investigate more thoroughly, in a bid to remove it. Artyom was scared, nevertheless agreed to surgery, and medical staff began arrangements. Dr. Kamashev prepared to begin removing the major part of Artyom's lung, following his findings in the tissue taken in his biopsy. The doctor then felt he was hallucinating when he found something unusual, and called an assistant to verify his thoughts. What the doctor had located was a fir tree growing inside Artyom's lung, and the assistant endorsed the findings. It came to light that Artyom had inadvertently swallowed a seed that somehow made its way into his lung, and had been growing for a while. Due to the graphic nature of the photo, we cannot show it here, but if you hop into Google, you should be able to find it. The fir tree measured 5 centimeters, and it became apparent that Artyom had been coughing up blood as the micropine needles had been piercing into his blood capillaries. Horrified, but now less relieved he didn't have cancer or a tumor, Artyom successfully had the foreign object removed from inside him. Artyom had made medical history and is still alive and well in 2024, aged 43. Let me know what you think about this oddity in the comments, and please subscribe. Thank you.